to do, because it's still not clear yet. Islamic economics is still not clear to the Malaysian people at large. I mean, through perspective of very detailed, or being able to institutionalize or create financial instruments. Alhamdulillah, Malaysia is growing very well, and we've been told to grow faster. But at large itself, a lot of the community itself doesn't know the difference between buying something through murabaha and buying something, by interest, because they see that if something is much more cheaper, then it is better. We still value it by the price of it, not the value of the product itself. Is it safe for us to use? Is it halal for us to use? And that questions a lot, because for example, recently a fellow student, a fellow colleague, if I may add, shared a criticism from Dr. Farah Musa, who criticized Islamic economics. He wanted to criticize about the practice of Malaysian Islamic economics, but he gave examples in Arab countries and talked about the result. The meaning of the result of Islamic economics is social justice. But he's criticizing and asking and demanding for the results of these principles, being introduced in society itself, which answers a lot, because in Malaysia, through many of our economic systems and difficulty in complex and complicated economic systems, we can see the result in our society is we are also confused and also we are also mixed and complex into what is truly the main focus of our country's economic growth. And to this, I find it's very sad, but also an opportunity for all of us to help clarify and help become those who can lead our country for better, inshallah.
Thank you very much to Ms. Nafisa for her brilliant answer. Is everyone still with us? And we understand what's happening? Yeah, everyone is today? Okay, inshallah. I find it very interesting what Nafisa said about the reality that's happening in Malaysia's economy. We know about the facts about its growing. We know the fact that it's one of the leading Islamic economics when we say about the world. I guess. Alhamdulillah about that. But yet again, as Malaysian people, we know what's really happening behind the scenes. We know what's and let's just leave it there, inshallah. But alhamdulillah, even though there are certain problems, but I guess there are no countries that we can go, without any problems. What's life without problems, right? So moving on, another question to Professor Dr. Qasim Anwari. How has capitalism and socialism, the two biggest economic theories, affected society now? How has capitalism and socialism affected society in the past and now? And how does Islamic economy differ in affecting the society if it's implied?
Thanks a lot. First of all, I have to remind you that in some Muslim countries, they use the word ma'ash for economics. They translate, I think in Urdu or something like this, to show that economics is very important to our lives. Ma'ash, living, like you make living, is ma'ash. Also, I have to remind you when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dhikri, okay, give you this Quran, everything in it. If you follow it, you will live in a good life. You will make sure that your economic performance will be excellent. But if you stay away from teachings of Quran, you will have a very tough life. معيشة ضنكا. the word danka in Arabic shows a lot of bad feelings. Because you are staying away from the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is close to the answer of his question. The thing about capitalism and socialism, they got some applications, some countries to apply them in the real life. The United States, Europe, they are applying the capitalism principles. They are making good economic performance. So people will tie the good performance with the system, saying that, look, capitalism is great. Look the performance. Look how the Americans are living, or the Europeans, how they are living. Socialism, they had a bad experience in their application. So, well, socialism is something bad. Look what happened to the Russians or the Soviet Union in the past. The same thing applied to Muslims. Someone might say, well, let's look at Islamic or Muslim countries in the world. Let all of them, almost all of them, are developing countries. Poverty is the greatest among them. Unemployment is the highest. Economic problems, debts, etc., all of them. Then, is it their economic system, Islamic economic system, is something bad? First of all, I never been to Malaysia. That's one thing. But I believe that one day people will write about the Malaysian economic miracle, like when they talk about the Japanese economic miracle. Okay, and in Japan, they said that the values, going back to the social values, the values of the samurai is the secret of their progress and their miracle. And I think in Malaysia, Islamic economic values might be the main source of their economic success in the future. Because I'm expecting more prosperity and more success for Malaysia, for so many things. First of all, the nature of people there, the organization of the people. When, as Jordanians here, when we talk about the Malaysian Hajj pilgrims who go to Mecca, you can know them that they are coming from Malaysia because they are so organized, so clean. Everyone knows almost everything about this mission and the Hajj. They all together. They wear something known to all of them. They are so organized. And this is so important. You find it something trivial or easy. But this is sometimes the secret for economic development and for success. Organization. The second thing, in Malaysia, I think they value time well. They are organized. They care about their time. They utilize their time. And another thing, a requirement for economic success. For corruption, you are scared about corruption and favoritism and etc. We have in economics a new study, an international study. You might get surprised or shocked by this study, saying that corruption is a necessity and it is so good for economic development. How? And of course you can feel it in Jordan, because in Jordan we have high level of corruption. If you prevent corruption, then no one likes to invest or to start a project or to make economic decisions, because he will be accused of corruption. So we'll find that economic will go back and you have no growth in the economy. This study shows that of course, how they conduct the study. As you know, they will bring a sample of countries and measure the corruption level, and then measure economic growth, and do a correlation study between the two. And then when they find a correlation between the two things, they start explaining why. When you have corruption, everyone likes to make a decision. Everyone likes to invest, to do some economic activities, because they can have some money on the side. And the economy will have some prosperity in it. Because if corruption is to a certain extent, it is acceptable. As you know, in our religion, if the hakim, if the ruler of the Muslim is not that good, you have still to obey him. And you cannot go against him unless, as you know, to announce kufr bawah, well-defined, clear kufr. Then you will say, la sam'a wa la ta'a. We are not going to follow or obey you. You see? Because the teachings of Islam saying that this ruler, if he is good to the Muslims, if he is strong, if he is go and spread Islam in other countries, if he is getting the country to good levels of economic performance, what he do as bad things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask him for that. In the hereafter, he will pay personally for that. But his good part, his good side, will reflect it in the community. But the bad side will be reflected on himself only. This is why I'm saying that in Malaysia, it is a good opportunity to all Muslims to have a country model, a country applying Islamic economics. When you hear the conference Sukuk 2 weeks ago almost, you look at a graph or a kind of diagram, the chart, yes, and you will find that in Malaysia it is like 90%, 70 to 80% of the Sukuk. That tells you something important, that this country is our laboratory for Islamic economics. If we want to develop Islamic economics, I think Malaysia is the best place for that, the best country. And this is my belief. We cannot keep trying this even mixed economy, because the mixed economy is something different. It is part of public ownership and private ownership. We have markets, at the same time we have government intervening in the economy and do some economic planning. But Islamic economics is something else. I wish I like to hear certain things about Islamic values in Malaysia. Like we have Malaysian social values. We like to investigate their source. Is it the religion? Is it Islam? Or are they consistent with Islamic teachings? When you go to the Islamic banks, I conducted a study in 1988 about the people who are dealing with Islamic banks in Georgia. What is the first incentive for them? Is it for religious purposes they go there, or for return, rate of return or profit they go there? And we found out from this study that people deal with Islamic banks only because their beliefs, their religious factors. Okay? So in Malaysia it is so important to conduct such studies about their attitudes and their values toward Islamic banks. The second question we need to know in Malaysia, the status of zakat. Is it compulsory in Malaysia or voluntary? And if it is voluntary, people, do they pay to the mosque or pay it directly to the needy people? This is also important. Also waqf. We know how waqf, is it well known? Is it spreading there or growing at least? Do you find clinics or schools or centers, cultural sectors as waqf? Or the only thing you will find, like in the Gulf area, mosques as water, there's their problem. As Muslims, we can pray any place, anywhere. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the whole earth as a good place for praying. But in Waqf, we need something good for the Muslims. We need some hospitals, some clinics, some schools and universities. I can come to Yarmouk University, say, and have 2 or 3 buildings close to the university, and I will say those are Waqf. Those will be given to the needy students at Yarmouk University alone. And we do this for other universities. This will progress our country and make it easier for people to study. So many people, they can't afford the medicine to buy or to go to a doctor. We should have centers for needy people and all the other needs. And when you study Waqf in Islamic histories, it was the engine for economic development. So going back to your question, when we look at capitalism and socialism, especially capitalism, we think that is a great system. But let's remember something. Capitalism is not so bad in principles. The application of capitalism is a problem. Why? I'm saying this. If you go back to the area or the era, the time before Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, what was the economic system in Mecca? You might ask yourself this question. They must have one kind of economic system. It was the capitalist system, because people used to own things. The ownership is free, and you remember they have these caravans. They go to in winter and in summer, الشتاء والصيف, and also they have markets. They used to be great in markets. Suq Ukab, when you say in history and in Islamic economics, Suq Ukab market. All Arabs used to come to Mecca during certain time of this market. So they have this market mechanism. When Islam came to the people, Islam left certain arrangements as is, accepted them, and now they are Islamic. But certain practices, they say, no, this is haram. See? For example, they used to have barter system. In barter system, as you know, Islam said, we have to organize this. You cannot trade gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, etc. Unless they are the same weight for weights, or the same size, mikyal for the makils. And if you study this hadith very well, and you go in depth, you find those are fungibles. They call them fungibles in economics. Fungibles means that you cannot separate the utility from the product itself. You see, in cars, there's no riba in cars, because you can separate the benefit from the car itself. But when it comes to wheat, bread, food, etc., if I want to eat a loaf of bread, I cannot separate the benefit from the bread itself. So we call them fungibles. Okay? Said in those fungibles, we have to organize them. In my dissertations, I did some chart. Okay? You have, for example, gold for gold. You have 2 conditions. They have to be the same weight, and at the same time they have the same measures, the same time, the same setting. The exchange must be conducted. If we go to wheat for gold, it's different story, you see. So in practice, you will find that Islamic economics and Islamic economic system is close to capitalism. Close to capitalism in the sense of markets, ownership, etc., etc. But the problem comes when the problem arises when it comes to Islamic finance, riba, the main thing, and also zakat and other things. So I think that Islamic economic system is closer to capitalism than to socialism. But as I mentioned at the beginning, it is on the 3rd dimension. It is different than all other systems. Thanks.
Jazakumullah khairan kathiran to Qasim for the answer. Alhamdulillah. I find that the answers are related to like Dr. said, that it's very important for us to value our time. It's very important for us to look at the very small things, the particular things. We might say that when coming here, we value our time by coming early. It's nothing, but that's what determines the importance, the growth, and everything is coming essentially. And I just want to tell you a brief story that I just went to Japan about 3 months ago. And what I can see in Japan is that the values, the time appreciation is, let's say, I guess everyone has heard this, at the community station, the time, for instance, in KTM in Malaysia, the time of the arrival of the train is about 7:15, let's say, and it arrives when 7:30, 7:45, like that. But what's happening in Japan is that the time of arrival is not 7:15, it's not 7, it's not 7:30, it's 7:24 or 7:17. You know, it's very particular, and the time that the train actually arrives is that time. You can see it. Well, okay, as the second goes into 60, it's 7:17. The train arrives, and it's incredible. And I find many stuff that in Japan is very valuable in terms of the economic miracle, as Dr. said. So moving on to the next question. As everyone here in this this student except the question is very important. Is that as students, why is it important for us? Why is it absolutely vital for us to know the correlation between the social values and the economics in Islam? So I ask Ms. Nafisa Aisha to elaborate on that question.
Thank you. First, I'd like to add on a little bit on what I already said about Japan. I read something from a book by Dr. Saiful Al-Rosli. He wrote a book of critical issues on Islamic finance and banking in Malaysia. And he talked about, these issues of social values and different social practices. He said, for example, in Japan, people would save because they were they socially practiced to save a lot, and they would do it no matter what the interest rate was. They would look at different interest rates, whether to save, spend, or what they would save. But in Malaysia, he compared that Malaysians are forced to save because we have EPF. It's the Employment Payment Fund, where we take money from our monthly salaries to go into the EPF. So if we didn't have that, what are our savings? With all the durian rutos and all even though we don't have money, we still spend in Malaysian culture, we still spend a lot during Eid. In Malaysian culture, we celebrate Eid for 30 days. So it's a practice, a culture, something we have to change. But those are the social values in Malaysia. So as a student, knowing all these problems and knowing, especially as an economics student, I think when I was in my third year, I was studying Episode Nukud and Dr. Adnan, the lover, those kind. He gave us a project to research outside of our textbooks about the effects of money on society. And I was doing a study on fiat money, and I was doing it on the effects on France. And during that time, I think 1940 or something, there was a decline in economy in France, and I was writing about the effects of fiat money. I know, right? It was very sudden and very out of the blue, very random. But what I found out was that such a thing like money can have such a big impact. The different usage of money can have such a big impact on society. It caused, difference in women having to, work, children forced to become laborers because of depreciating and declining in economic growth, and so much more. And I think this was the moment where I suddenly realized that economics is, or whatever that we're studying today, is not just about facts and figures and numbers, but it's about impacting and giving impact towards everyday people's lives in itself. And it's such a huge thing to realize that during my third year, so it was kind of late for me to realize that so late. As an Islamic economics student itself, when I read on certain issues or certain books by professors who study Islamic economics, especially Dr. Azna Hassan, who wrote about a book that's published by IBF, and I'm sure all of you have read it. It's the fundamentals of Sharia and banking system. I mean, he wrote it, and he wrote it to an extent. He had in his disclaimer in the beginning. He said that Islamic values are supposed to be are portrayed as Islamic principles are practiced. You know what that means? That means that if we conduct Islamic practices, supposedly the effects are those good values that we get. That's what it means. And this reminds me of the mafhum of Surah Al-Adiyat, which talks about, in the beginning, it talks about our personal ibadah practices, like salah, zakah, and fasting, and we do all that. And if we neglect that, it shows a correlation and effect to society itself deteriorating or declining. What it means here is that everything we do personally, or all the Islamic principles that we do, we avoid riba, or we try to implement zakat, or try so hard to implement Islamic principles. Why? It's so that we will get that society effect, those good morals, those good social values and social justice. And this is something larger than us itself. If in Surah Al-Adiyat it just talks about prayers and all that stuff, this is something larger. I mean, economics is like what Dr. Hassan said. It's managed, it's your lifestyle, your whole life. So it must have that effect, that large effect that can encompassate and include and be inclusive with everyone. So among certain problems that we might face as students when we return to Malaysia, it's argumentable and debatable, these problems. Taxation, I think, is one of the biggest arguments that I've read so far currently, and issues with middle income traps, and also issues with income disparities, and possible issues with what is stated does Malaysia acknowledge as poverty in Malaysia. Because when I looked up online, okay, in the EPU website, everyone can look up, the poverty line that our government has put is below 1,000 ringgit. Okay? But when I looked, 1,000 ringgit is close to how much? Average? 200 dinars. So below that is considered poor in Malaysia. But seriously, we all live in Malaysia, right? So we know what 1,000 can buy. Okay? In an urban city, 1,000 you cannot buy anything. Okay? So I recalculated those who lived below 3,000. You know how much I calculated? It was near 30%. So that, puts us in perspective and makes us priorities right. Islamic banks, or whatever ventures that we are put on, are profit-based. That's what we tend to believe, unfortunately, are profit-based. And Professor Saiful Azhar himself has stated that the problems in Malaysia is that we want to be competitive, but at the same time, our Islamic values tells us that we have to compete in certain arenas like welfare, zakah, and everything else. So how do these Islamic institutions answer to that? How do Islamic banks who want to maximize profit in the name of Islam, unfortunately, but at the same time do its duties as Islamic banks to society? Somehow it's hard to match. So that's where we come in, where we not only practice Islamic, so-called Islamic economic principles by name, but also, put out its morale and its values out. Okay.